Hey, everybody. Just a quick note before today's podcast episode. In today's conversation, I'll be speaking with Aisha Adkins about her relationship with her parents, and that includes her mother, Rosetta Linda Adkins. In the time since our conversation, she has since passed away, and so today we'd like to dedicate the episode in honor of her memory.
As I've grown up, I do think of my parents a little bit differently than when I was a child, in the fact that I realize that they are also human. They are working through life just as anyone else is working through life.
I think of my parents differently now that I'm an adult, and that I see, all the hard work that they put in.
I understand now what it is like to be an adult, and that they are always trying to do the best that they can, and maybe as a child you don't really realize that perspective, and you just think they're your parents and that they're going to be here to do whatever you need, but really they're just living their lives too.
I appreciate the sacrifices they've made more.
I still respect their wisdom, and at the same time I realize that I can also give them advice, and that's definitely been one of the more fulfilling things as I've entered kind of early adulthood is realizing that there are things that I can offer them too.
Hello, and welcome to You, Me, and Ennui, the show where you, the listener, and me, your host, Mary Kate Polanin, discuss the challenges that come with life's uncertainty. And that's the ennui. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of You, Me, and Ennui. And today, we are joined by our guest, Aisha Adkins. Aisha is an Atlanta-based caregiver, writer, thought leader, speaker, and organizer who is passionate about building an equitable, inclusive, and comprehensive public health and care infrastructure using media, storytelling, and culture and policy change. Her versatility has enabled her to publish works both in academic journals and popular publications. When she's not trying to affect positive systemic change, she enjoys classic film, live music, and the great outdoors. She's also an aspiring tea connoisseur. So welcome, Aisha. It's so good to have you.
Thank you so much, Mary Kate. I'm glad to be here.
So we're really happy to have you here for the opportunity to talk about what you've written about for us actually on Amendo is the relationship that you have with your parents. So the crux of this season on You, Me, and Ennui is about relationships, but we're really exploring it from every single possible angle. So we're really interested in digging into relationships with your parents and how that evolves over time. So, I'd love to just kick it off by introducing our listeners to your story. And I'll mention, you became a caretaker for your parents at a young age. Can you share more about that transition and what that was like when you first moved back in with your parents?
Most definitely. So I started caring for my mother at the age of 27 when she was diagnosed with frontotemporal dementia, which is a rare form of dementia impacting adults under the age of 60, which is different from other forms that tend to impact folks later in life. And interestingly enough, I was already living at home because I finished college and then graduated into a recession with a degree in social services. So, finding that full-time job and getting out there on my own was taking a little longer than I had initially expected. It worked out ultimately because while I was there, I was able to observe and notice those changes in my mother's personality, to observe her short-term memory loss and things that if I were not living in the home that I probably would not have picked up on as soon as I did. But being there in the home certainly was not my not my goal, and I didn't realize that it would kind of forecast the rest of my future in a lot of ways.
Wow. So, it was because you were at home that you started to see the changes in your mother. That's really incredible. And, I think a lot of folks, you have such a unique circumstance, but I think a lot of folks can relate to moving back home. At least personally, I can. I have moved back home twice with my parents, when I'm either in between leases or it made more sense, but it didn't make that transition any easier. Can you share more about what that change was like when you were living with your parents, and maybe any of the challenges that came with it.
Certainly, I think particularly when you are coming from a more independent space. I was living on my own when I was in college, and coming back to my parents' home, as a lot of young adults did during that time, as well as throughout the pandemic, there was a sense of a loss of some of that independence, and kind of the roles that we play in our families' lives look a little different. And I had questions about, gosh, how frequently do I communicate with my parents? What is it that I'm sharing with them? And, not that I was doing anything nefarious, but certainly, is it something, am I checking in with them when I, spend time with friends? Do I have a curfew now? How are finances coordinated? Because essentially, in some ways, you are always your parents' child, but also now as an adult, you're kind of a roommate as well. And so kind of figuring out how we're showing up in each other's lives, and in what ways we depend on each other, and what ways I wanted to exert, my own independence. All of that had to be explored. And so, there were some conversations around what my relationship with them would look like. And ultimately it didn't change a whole lot from when I was growing up. But, but I think ultimately it was what it needed to be at the time.
So, you're talking about this evolving relationship with your parents, negotiating new terms, as it were. And so that's within the confines of you and your parents' relationship. Where did you find that it was helpful to turn to for support or maybe comfort outside of that relationship with your parents? How did you learn to care for yourself while caring for others?
That was definitely a journey, and something that I had to figure out over time. And it took several years, because the challenging piece of becoming a caregiver at 27 is that there are so few other folks in that age bracket who are experiencing the same thing. And so it made it very difficult to connect with my peers, former classmates, neighbors, etc., who were in my age group. They were pursuing their dream jobs and buying their first home and getting married, starting families. And that's just not a phase of life that I was in. I was in a phase of life that many of our parents were experiencing in caring for grandparents. And so looking for spaces to connect with other folks who were sharing that lived experience was really difficult early on. However, as much of a bad rap as we tend to give social media, it was really, really integral in me finding my people, finding my community, and being able to connect with other folks who are saying, gosh, you know what? That's what I'm experiencing now as well. And, connecting with others in virtual support groups and the like was tremendously helpful in just feeling seen and feeling heard, which is something that I think can be really difficult in a lot of support spaces that are geared toward much older participation. And so social media played a big role in the internet overall. Spaces even like audio apps like Clubhouse, all of those kinds of spaces have been really, really, really helpful.
Wow, yeah, that's really innovative. I hadn't considered how Clubhouse, the audio chat app, might be helpful. I was going to ask you, specifically, what kind of apps were you looking on? Were you maybe on like Reddit threads or possibly Facebook groups? I don't know which were the most helpful for you.
It's really interesting to see how communication changes and the way that we identify changes over time, and what our needs are change over time. So in the very earliest days of my caregiving journey, Facebook groups were really essential. I was able to log in and say, this is what I'm experiencing. Has anyone else gone through this? And, it kind of offered a space to vent. But then as I transformed into kind of more of an advocate and an activist in this space, and I looked for spaces that were a bit more uplifting, I transferred some of my energies from the Facebook spaces and have placed a lot of energy in a lot of the advocacy work that I do, and a lot of the writing and finding people who are doing similar work around caregiving, through my role at Caring Across Generations. I've really found a community there of people who are eager to make positive change through policies that impact family caregivers and the people they're caring for. So the needs have changed and evolved over time. And then through the course of the pandemic, I was able to log on to Clubhouse and connect with other groups of caregivers there. And the conversations have been a bit different, I think. Sometimes you can find spaces where you just need to vent and you just need people to kind of be that listening ear. Sometimes you need spaces for folks to encourage you toward action. And then sometimes you just need spaces to brainstorm. And there, different mediums can be helpful for each of those areas of need for me.
I mean, I guess my follow-up questions to all of that are two. One, you've talked about how a lot of times people who are in your situation are of a different age demographic. Was it more internal, like you were more self-aware? Oh, I think I might be the youngest person here. Or is that something that you heard from other people? Or did you find maybe other people who were in a very similar situation to you? Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, all of the above. When I've attended some of the online groups even, I've certainly been one of the youngest, if not the youngest, people in the virtual space. And then once I did connect with others who were closer to my age, understanding that they had the same experience and found it more challenging to connect in all aspects of their lived experience, it helped me, first of all, identify the need for spaces for younger caregivers, but also just to recognize that I am not actually alone, even if it feels like it from time to time.
Mm-hmm. It sounds like you found a really rich support community. Are there other ways that you practice caring for yourself besides doing that sort of outreach?
Definitely. I am a big proponent of therapy. It's something that has been so life-changing during this particular journey. Caregiving can be really rewarding, but can also be really challenging. And I think something that people tend to overlook is the fact that oftentimes when we are providing care for someone, it's because they are sick. And, at the end of the day, having very sick parents is a very emotional experience. And so having a therapist to kind of help me unpack some of that and process what I'm experiencing and what it means in relation to my own life and past experiences and all of the things that kind of come into play has been incredibly helpful. And then I think also just trying to take care of myself in practical ways, like eating right, getting, exercise, trying to get sleep when I can, which is often easier said than done, but at least prioritizing these things in my life has been tremendously helpful. And being really intentional. I know this season is about relationships, and one thing that I've learned over the course of this journey is to be intentional about the relationships that I have socially, romantically, even with work, making sure that I am spending my energy wisely because it is in limited amount right now, and making sure that I am showing up for people who've shown up for me and who support me, finding ways to connect with people differently maybe than I would have in the past, and really just leaning into the people who are rooting for me and who have been constant supports for me. The one thing about becoming a caregiver at a young age is that sometimes folks, when they don't quite know what to say or cannot relate to what you're experiencing, their initial reaction is to kind of just fade away, right? And I think that was a really difficult lesson to learn, but with growth and maturity on my part, I had to understand that it's not their fault that they've not had this life experience yet. Someday, ultimately, they most likely will, but they just don't know how to process what's going on with me. Yeah. And finding my people and finding folks who, even if they don't understand what I'm experiencing, can say, listen, I'm going to meet you where you are. So if that means, we can hang out for 30 minutes at a coffee shop, then that's what I'll do. And I'm willing, because I value your friendship and I value your presence in my life. So really leaning into those relationships has been helpful in helping me to fight loneliness, to fight isolation, and to really boost my mental health.
That's really beautiful. You've also blogged about the role that faith plays in your life. Can you say a little bit more about how that relates to your own self-care, especially as a caregiver?
Most definitely. I spend a lot of time reading devotionals. I journal a lot. Prayer is a constant. I would not make it through a single day without prayer, without knowing that God is a constant and that, amidst the seeming chaos, that he is in ultimate control. Sometimes the life of a caregiver can feel very uncontrolled. And there's so many things that I don't have control over. And so being able to really surrender that to God has been something that I've had to learn over and over again, right? And so maintaining those relationships that are rooted in faith has also been tremendously important to me. Spending that time, praying with one another and, cultivating that fellowship has been tremendously important as well. Calling on our church community to, show up for us as well in practical ways has been a tremendous blessing, whether it's calling on folks because we need meals prepared or transportation assistance and things like that. But maintaining those relationships that have God at the center is something that has really continued to uplift me, and then maintaining my own personal relationship with God as well has been so important. I would say that this journey has definitely deepened my faith in ways that I could not have anticipated, but certainly that when you're kind of brought to that space where you have no other choice but to depend on God, but to trust in him, you find that that's where you grow in your faith.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about, what does your day-to-day prayer relationship look like that? And what I mean is, I know personally speaking, my prayers are often petition, like asking for things, or sometimes they're actually like shaking my fist up in the air saying like, why? and then a lot of the times it's just a big thank you. So I wonder, how does that look like for you, even on a day-to-day basis?
That's a great question. Yes, I can relate to much of what you're saying. And it varies from day to day, from week to week. When there is a particularly acute situation going on where someone's in the hospital or, having a particularly challenging night, there can be those moments of asking why, what did we do as a family, collectively or individually? Like what happened? And really wanting answers, right? But then usually by the morning, it's thank you for bringing us through another night. Please just give me the patience and the strength that I need and the grace that I need to get through another day. And this is what, these are my common prayers. And on those nights or, during those days when there is an emergency situation, there's a lot of prayer for healing, a lot of prayer for not patience, but prayers for a calm spirit and trust and knowing that, okay, whatever is happening is in your hands, and I trust that whatever the result is your will ultimately, and really becoming comfortable with that and okay with that is something that I've learned as well.
Yeah, I mean, I smiled when you said not patience. I'm not praying for patience, because I have had that conversation with a friend. She said, you need to stop praying for patience because you're only going to get opportunities to become more patient.
Exactly.
And that has stuck with me. So I really, what you're saying really resonates with me. And I think it will with the people listening at home as well. Thank you for being so honest with, where the challenges have been. You've also written about how rewarding it is to learn from your parents. What's been the most unexpected or greatest lesson that you've learned from them, and have you taught them anything as well?
It's really interesting. I never expected to be in the front row of a masterclass on marriage and relationships. My parents are high school sweethearts. They've been together since they were 15 and 17, or 15 and 16, and then but they had known each other most of their lives. Their families were close, and it's been really incredible to see them love each other through some of the most challenging times in their lives. There are things that, I think would make the average person run screaming for the hills, but being able to witness their vows in action, to witness their love in action, has been really inspiring. And I think, The lesson that I learned is that if my love doesn't resemble that in some way, if someone's love for me doesn't resemble that kind of relationship, that dedication, that steadfastness, then it's not something that I want. And the reason that's important is because, I spent so much of my 20s and early 30s so upset and frustrated by relationships that didn't work out. And, in retrospect, thinking back, I realized that, it wasn't the right relationship for me. And I had to kind of be resolved to that. But again, witnessing what my parents have, not to say that, they've had the perfect marriage, because they're not perfect people, but certainly the way that they've loved each other and the way that they've shown up truly with that unconditional love for one another, that has been rooted in their faith in Christ. Like, I'm in awe still every day. And that's something that I am willing to wait for and willing to strive for in my own romantic relationship someday.
Amen. That was beautiful. That is so wonderful that, this proximity to your parents has really, like you said, I love what you said, given you a front row seat in a master class to marriage, and to really see those vows lived out. That's going to stick with me for a little while. So listening to you share your experience, I keep talking, I've said a few times that it's a unique circumstance, but I'm curious to know, like, do you happen to have a stat or know, on average, how many Americans, say, are in your position as young caretakers? How is it unique, or is it more often than you would even think?
Yes, it is actually more common than a lot of folks realize. So there are 53 million family caregivers in the U.S. Of that 53 million, I believe about 25% are young adults. And this also includes folks in their teens. So this is something that it's common, and it's becoming more increasingly so. And so it's something that, one of the reasons that I'm so vocal about it is because I want people to know that they're not alone. I want people to be able to connect and to relate to what others are going through and to feel less isolated.
What a great mission you have. And that's interesting. So it sounds like about a fourth of caregivers are young adults in their teens. Wow. But for everyone who's not in that position, they might not find themselves as a caregiver to their parents, or at least right now. They might in the future. But from this time in your life, what would you say would be your best advice to others about cultivating a strong relationship with their parents, whether or not they live with them?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a great point. Caregiving relationships can come in all different shapes and forms. There are all different kinds of configurations of families. And what I would say is that one of the pivotal moments for me is when I finally reached acceptance of my role, acceptance of my mother's illness. It didn't mean that I was happy about any of it, because it is a really difficult situation to be in. But once I really acknowledged and accepted that this is what's going on, this is where I am in life right now, this is where God wants me, then I was able to take the time to really appreciate those subtle moments, to appreciate those things and those opportunities that I know won't come around again. So it might be something as simple as just, we could be sitting there watching television and I'm just holding my mom's hand, right? There was a time when I was frustrated by that because, society, etc., puts these expectations on us around, by the time you're 25, you should be married. By the time you're 30, you should have, your own home, et cetera, et cetera. And I felt like all of these things were just passing me by and I didn't understand. But once I realized that, there are plenty of homes out there, I haven't met my person, so I'm not worried that I'm not going to get married just yet. There are plenty of job opportunities that will be available. But I only get one set of parents. I can't trade them out. I can't put them, on a layaway plan or, pay in for whatever it is that's popular right now. These are the parents I have. And so prioritizing them and centering them in my life for as long as I can is where I'm willing to live right now. And so I would just encourage folks to examine their hearts and really ask God to reveal to them what their priorities need to be and to help them move through acceptance. And acceptance also is not something that you do once and move on. It's something you have to come to time and time again. But the more you do it, the easier it does become. And it can completely change your outlook and your perspective on your role and help you to live a more intentional and meaningful life.
Yeah, I actually want to touch on something from acceptance that you've been saying. I can give a personal example. When I think the first time that I decided to move back in with my parents, just as like a little period between things, I was woken up in the middle of the night by my mom, and she comes in and she shows me her phone. She says, help me, help me. I've posted every single photo on my camera roll to Facebook. How do I fix this? And your face is my face. I was so shocked. And so I took her phone and I tried to figure out how to delete everything. And then as I'm deleting everything, I see her looking around at my room, just checking how messy it is. And I remember thinking you are not in the position of power right now, my friend. You put my brother's health insurance card on your on Facebook. And so I deleted it. For me, I was I remember thinking, wow, my parents are human. They're not always going to be right. And I wonder if there was a moment like that for you, the first time you remember thinking, oh, okay, so we're all adults and we're all imperfect. What was that like for you?
Yeah, I think it was probably something as simple as realizing that my dad didn't know how to load the dishwasher correctly or something like that, right? And how frustrated I was in that moment, but also realizing progressive and as forward thinking as they were, they also kind of adhered to some traditional gender roles and, me kind of trying to figure some of that out and navigate that as I took on some of the roles that my mother had previously handled, realizing that, my father is very disorganized, that my mother was super duper organized, but really just kind of seeing how they showed up as adults and things, like paying for insurance and kind of monitoring our calendars and things like that. We all have skill sets that we excel in and we all have things that we could work on. And, discovering that really it did kind of feel like it sort of leveled the playing field a little bit. And what it revealed to me is that as I was still kind of coming into my role as an adult, that adults don't have it all figured out. Mm-hmm. And that's something that I think I had to grapple with, and it took me a moment because I was still looking to my parents for guidance and realizing that they actually don't have all the answers. So this is actually something we're gonna have to figure out together.
That's a really good point. So switching gears, can you tell us a little bit about the organization that you founded, Our Turn to Care?
I can. So I founded Our Turn to Care in 2017 because I did notice a lack of support systems, not only for younger caregivers, but for caregivers of color and folks who are kind of historically marginalized. As many things as caregivers can have in common, there are just systemic lived experiences that differ based on how you show up in the world, whether it's your race and other ways that you identify. And so I really wanted to be able to cultivate spaces that were really intentionally created with that in mind. We eventually merged with the Love Labor Project, and then after about 4 years, we eventually disbanded because we were both myself and my co-executive director were really overwhelmed with care responsibilities. And so we ultimately decided to pause those services. That being said, I am working on something new and we'll be sharing more about that later this year, but I'm really excited and I'm really hopeful that I'll be able to help folks in a different way. But I encourage folks to stay tuned to my website and social media for more about that in the future.
We'll leave in the show notes where folks can find more information that you just mentioned. And so there's one question that we're asking all of our guests, and it has to do with the third word in our podcast title, ennui. So this idea of listlessness, blahs, feeling stuck. Is there anything giving you a sense of ennui right now?
Oh gosh. Yeah, I mean, I would say that imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome is real. I think that because I entered into my career later in life than many of my peers, where my peers have, at least 10 years work experience behind them. I only have a couple of years of organizing experience in my pocket. And so there are times when I feel uncertain of how I ended up at the table, and that can be immobilizing at times, and it can feel very challenging to just kind of feel to stay motivated, because I want to make sure that I'm showing up as my best self. The problem comes in when I am comparing my best to someone else's best.
Yeah.
And that can make me feel kind of blah. But when I remind myself that the only comparison I can make is to the me that I was yesterday, I feel much better and I can get unstuck. And then a good music playlist doesn't hurt either.
Oh, well, now you're going to have to drop the link to the music playlist that you listen to as well. I was going to ask you how you break out of it. I really like that comparison of, you can only compare yourself to the you that you were yesterday. That really resonates with me. Well, thank you so much, Aisha, for joining us. This has been a really, really enlightening conversation. I think this is such a helpful way to look at your relationship with your parents, no matter what the challenges look like, because it really depends on the person, right? So if there's anything else that you'd like to share, or where people can find or read your work, or what you're going to be up to, feel free to share that right now.
Most definitely. I am always happy to connect with folks. I think the easiest way to reach out is via my website, which is just my name, AishaAdkins.com. I'm also on social media, Twitter at Aisha Adkins, and Instagram, Aisha.Adkins. I'm happy to connect with folks, and I love hearing others' journeys as well.
And, fun fact, you can also find Aisha's writing on our website on Amendo. Her most recent article is about what you learned from moving back in with your parents. So we'll also link to that as well. And thank you again.
Yes, thank you so much. This has been lovely.
Thanks again for listening to You, Me, and Ennui. As always, I hope the conversation today offered a bit of insight into whatever you're facing. And know that there are at least one or two more people here in podcast land who can relate, because that's what we're trying to do, build a community. Looking for some deeper reflection on today's conversation? Be sure to listen to our bonus meditation after this for a few questions on how this topic might apply to your life. If you enjoyed the podcast, be sure to like, review, and subscribe. You can also join the conversation at our Discord server, linked in the show notes. I'm your host, Mary Kate Polanin, and the one thing that's for certain is that I'll be with you next time on You, Me, and Ennui.